welcome everybody to our last in our series of 4 soup and speaker events for this Lent. All of them focusing on care for God's creation. We are lucky to have a panel today of wonderful Bennies and a professor representing environmental studies and a trip to the climate conference in Poland. So without further ado, let me give a few introductions here. First we have Dr. Corrie Grosse. She's assistant professor of environmental studies at St. Ben's and St. John's. Hails from Idaho and got her master's at UC Santa Barbara in sociology and a doctorate as well with interdepartmental emphasis in environment and society. She specializes in the intersection of energy extraction, climate justice, and grassroots organizing. Our student panelists are, and I don't know what order we have them in here, but I'm going to have them identify themselves as I read their name. Phil Jha, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Okay. Corrie says you go by Echo.
Yes.
That's easier. She's a senior communication major from China. Mallory is a senior environmental studies major from Virginia, Minnesota. Valerie Doze from Fargo, a junior biochem pre-med double major. She has her work cut out for her. Morgan Clark Sanger from Bloomington, junior environmental studies major, and Melissa Earl from Olympia, Washington, environmental and peace studies majors. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having us and for inviting us and for the delicious meal. That was very kind of you. And I'm excited that Peggy invited us to be part of this because I think our students are doing a lot of good thinking and acting around the issues of climate justice. So I teach a lot about climate justice, and I like to describe it as the idea.
We can't hear you back here.
To use the mic, I think.
I'll just be really loud. Did you hear any of it?
Not before, we can now.
Okay. So thank you very much for having us and for the invitation. I was really pleased that Peggy reached out to us because we have a lot of students that are doing a lot of important thinking and acting around climate justice. This is one of the central areas of my teaching, and I like to describe it as the idea that social justice and environmental issues, in particular climate change, are fundamentally interconnected. We can't have a healthy planet if we don't have social justice, and we can't achieve social justice if we don't have a healthy planet. So that's kind of the really quick definition. But I issued a call to students who I know are engaged and passionate about climate justice, and these are the folks who answered. Some of them went to the United Nations climate negotiations last fall in Poland. Others have taken a whole bunch of different classes in environmental studies and with me. And so our presentation today will just be asking their perspectives on a few different questions related to climate justice and how to take action. And so we'll hear the perspectives, and that'll be the structure of it, and then there will be time for questions and answers, and so we look forward to those. So we'll start by asking everyone just what is climate justice to you? I guess speak really loud.
Yeah, I can start. Can everyone hear me, or should I speak closer?
You might need to
the
stand
mic?
up.
Feel free to turn that and speak into it. Just do the best you can from there. That's fine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I think I was first exposed to climate justice and heard about it last spring in my political science course. And so for me, a main part of it is looking at and understanding that there are human faces behind climate change. As a natural science major, I've always been interested in and understood the importance of utilizing science to study climate change, but there's also the human side that the graphs and the models and the data can't represent as accurately. And so for me, it's really taking a look at the other fields and utilizing other areas of study as well as personal experiences to understand what people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And when I was in Poland last semester, I interviewed people for my research about the impact of climate change on conflict and on climate refugees and people who are from mostly Syria, Somalia, and Nigeria. And I wanted to look at how they're impacted by climate change. And so what really struck me was when at the conference I was able to speak to a young Nigerian man who was the same age as me. And he was talking about how the extreme flooding and droughts in different areas of Nigeria have caused there to be conflict, and specifically in the north, they have terrorist groups that are taking control of water and depleting it or using it to have people join them in order to maintain control of resources. And so for me, it was really understanding that this young man who is the same age as me has to go through all these results of climate change and worry about his safety or his family's safety, and as a country worry about whether there will be an outbreak of war eventually, as we saw in Syria and Somalia, and how that's impacted increased migration and displacement.
Piggybacking off of that, I know that Valerie talked about how climate justice is the effect. I think that it's important to give context and explain what it is, and that it can be different for each person, but that it is how it's the social side of how the climate is affecting people and harm. And so I like to define it for myself personally as a sustainable equity. And so sustainability is this process of maintaining long-term development and being able to adapt and make changes to your surrounding environment, while equity is more defined as being impartial and fair and having equal access to opportunity and to wealth and mostly to natural resources. And so going along with what Valerie was saying, having access to shelter or access, even if there is this extreme flooding, then access to fresh water or access to food security. Those are things that are fundamental that a lot of us, especially here in the United States and in central Minnesota, we have the privilege to take for granted, that we easily turn on our water tap and water comes out free flowing, and we just got to have a really delicious meal with all of this soup and fresh vegetables, that it's just not the reality of so many people. And the reason that that is occurring is because there is these extreme detrimental climate effects that are taking on our world right now. And it's hard for us to see sometimes because we are not the ones being directly impacted. It's the ones who maybe don't have as much of a voice or as much of a say, who are then feeling this harm. And so climate justice is bringing a voice and bringing justice to these people across the world who are feeling the immediate impacts, and we who have the privilege in order to be able to support them then are able to bring justice and a just life for them as well.
I can go. Oh my God, thank you so much. So both of them have really good points on climate justice. And for me, as a communication major, so I'm the non-science representative here. So when I was in COP, and then my research is on how climate change specifically impacting rural women in China. And it was I've been talking with my peers, it was really, really hard for me to find a representation from specifically representing women, not even gonna mention about rural women. So when I think about climate justice, is the representation, so when you are going to the climate change conference, and the people who the indigenous community, the women, the children who are suffered from climate change on the front line, their voice are not being heard. And that's something that we really need to take into consideration when you are making those decisions. Otherwise, how can you know your decisions are right for those group of like vulnerable community? And also just like education, because a lot of the community that they don't know, like they are like, it's so hard to get in water, and it's just harder and harder every year. Like you have to walking further to getting water, but they don't know why. And then just like be able to understand that climate change are affecting everyone and in everyone's life, and like just having the access. Like I was talking about how expensive to go to Poland, because like thinking about the tickets to go there and the registration and like the lodging, transportation, everything, it costs so much money. And like for us, it was pain in the butt to pay for the price and to go to it's definitely a privilege to go to a conference. And then a lot of like kids from or young like teenagers, they from other like country, they might not be able to go to a conference like that, and then it's just like, how can you bring everyone on the same table, and then whose responsibility, who should pay more money? Like it's all about climate justice. Yeah, thank you.
So high tech.
Hello. Okay. Just kind of piggybacking off of everyone who's gone so far. I guess a very clear definition that comes to my mind when I think of climate justice is, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. I would say climate justice for me is bringing justice to all environmentally discriminated groups, whether that is based off your race, your class, your creed, your sexual orientation, your gender, your sexuality, or even the culture you come from. For me, climate justice is about relieving not only the non-targeted groups of people, but also the targeted groups of people who are negatively impacted by climate change. And I think it's very important to understand that climate change is a global change, and it affects everyone, as my peers have here clearly stated. And I feel like in my life, I realized that climate justice was very important the second I stepped into, I guess the second I would say I became interested in climate topics or even the environment, because it was affecting me and I didn't even know it. So it affects everyone, and I think that's important to know.
So climate justice for me is the idea where it's a right. Everyone has a right to climate. So kind of like what Melissa was talking about, everyone has a right to fresh water. Everyone on this planet, no matter where they come from, has a right to an environment that is healthy, sustainable, and wholesome. Everyone has a right to a life. But along with being a right, from my personal experience, climate justice is a movement in of itself. Like when I was in Poland, so many people were advocating for the climate, and they're advocating for the people who live in the climate, which is everyone. Climate justice isn't just an idea, it's a lifestyle that everyone should be partaking in. It's a lifestyle where you're supporting everyone, and you're supporting where they live and supporting their land that they live on, and it's just being really open-minded at the same time. Yeah.
So what do you all think, the next question would be, what do they think is the best argument to share with friends and family for why climate justice action is needed?
So this actually goes really well with what Mallory was just saying, because she explained how that this is a topic and an issue that is affecting everybody on this planet. And so I think the best argument to share about why action is needed in a climate just world is the fact that nature and the environment is the one absolute, the one shared experience that we all have, that every organism, every human being, that is something we can connect on. That throughout our lives, we've either been touched by having a tree in our backyard, or being able to see flowers in the springtime, or go to the ocean if you hear big waves or the running water. That is something that you can't take away from anyone. It's a very personal experience, and it's something that we all can connect on because nature touches everybody. And so there's this overlap with the human world and the natural world that is very apparent right now, because people who then are unable to experience and have positive experiences with their natural world, they're getting stripped of that right. And what they then experience is extreme storms, whether that be flooding or drought or something like that, where they think of Mother Nature as this harmful big force that is wiping out all of their crops or their resources, or where they're able to have areas of clean hygiene and hygienic practices. And so with the limited time span that we're now on of trying to say, there's this report, if any of you have heard, from the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC, and they came out with a report stating that we now this year we have 11 years left until there's this threshold, a tipping point, where we will warm our planet to past 1.5 degrees Celsius, and then we will not be able to go back. We can't help mitigate any of this harm. That's our threshold. That's all we have, and that's in 11 years. And so I think all of us as students feel that really strongly, and we feel that very close to home, just thinking about where we'll be in 11 years, but then also thinking about how if we're trying to argue for a climate just world, the only way that we can support people and human lives in 11 years is logistically by supporting the surviving livelihoods of people in a climate just world.
That was so good.
Yeah, they could just hold the mic.
Yeah, I was just holding it.
Just pass it around. But keep this on it because this is the recording.
Oh,
There's something. If you could.
thank you. I think that's
Hold this mic separately.
Yes, they're going to. Did you get a shot?
No.
I can just hold it. Oh, what have I done? Definitely. Wow, it's so loud. Like Melissa had a really great answer for that, and for me, I would love to introduce this awesome 15-year-old. I think it's 15 still, right? She is an awesome human being. Her name is Greta Thunberg. She's a 15-year-old Swedish girl, and she just got nominated by Nobel Peace Prize. And she was the one inspired all the young people all around the world to strike on Friday to go to talking to the local legislation. She just inspiring so many people. And then we actually saw her in COP. And one of the quotes she said to the people on the climate justice panel is, "You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes." Everyone have children, have grandchildren, and Melissa said, the IPCC report, and we only have 11 years to taking action, to hopefully to protect our environment, our Mother Nature. Can you just imagine, even though it's just don't think about your daughter, your granddaughter, or grandkids. just like see the people as a human, and every human, they deserve the right to have the access to fresh water, have the access to clean air. Like, I really, like, after I taken Corrie's class last semester, I was really, just because I'm from China, and I just really started thinking back about my life, and then, because like air pollution in China, in the big cities, not everywhere, but in big cities, it's just not good. And then like I was talking to people about like, how could that impact my family? And I was thinking about my mom had this like nose surgery. And then like I never thought of like, I didn't even know why she even got that. Like she just having like, it was so in pain. And then she like had like staying, like just taking some stuff out of her nose, and then now her nose still have a problem. She have to go back to check it like regularly. And I was thinking like why my mom just started like having those nose like breathe problem. And then I was thinking about it might could be just affected by the air pollution, and like everything somehow I think they're connected. And if you don't like take an action on your personal level, and it might actually infect people you love, and then you're taking away the human right that everyone deserves. Thank you.
Just because I know one of our panelists will leave at around 6:35, I want to state our other questions and kind of just open it up to them, and they can answer as they please. But the other things that I asked them to think about was how they in their personal lives work on climate justice, and what they see as the most effective and hopeful strategies for achieving climate justice. So feel free to discuss any of those.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the question we were still on the best argument. So I grew up in a very Catholic family, and it wasn't until I came to St. Ben's that I started connecting with my love for the environment with my love for my faith. And so I have read Laudato Si by Pope Francis, which I would definitely recommend. I just wanted to share some quotes on why it is almost our duty as like faith-living Catholics to care for the environment for everyone who lives within it. So Pope Francis points out that if everything is related, then the health of society's institutions have consequences for the environment and the quality of human life. So he's saying that the health of society is also dependent on the health of the environment, and the health of the environment is dependent on the health of society. So by being strong to our faith and being strong to our resolutions, I think that is a great way to be advocates for climate justice, by being strong to our morals as like faith-loving Catholics. And another quote that he points out why climate justice is so important is he brings up the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And he talks about how 20% of the world's populations consumes resources at a rate that robs the poor nations and future generations of what they need to survive. So he's talking about like developed countries like our own, and how even though by being ignorant or choosing not to fully understand what is happening, and by consuming all these resources and consuming food that we don't eat, we're actually hurting the poor in different countries. Like, it's our responsibility as Catholics and of just people to be aware of how our actions have consequences on the climate and the people who live in the climate. So I thought that was really important. And my last quote from Pope Francis is, everything is interconnected, and the genuine care for our own lives and of our relationships with nature is inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness from others. So like a Catholic congregation in church and like our school and our classrooms, we all care for each other, and we all want our own well-being, and that also is connected to our well-being of nature. Like, we have a connection with nature, and it's important that we keep that relationship with nature strong, just like we do with our sisters and our brothers within the church. And that's what I wanted to say from Pope Francis. Thank you.
I wanted to piggyback off of something that Echo had said earlier, mentioning the idea behind that we need to make a sustainable future for our future generations. And it reminds me of something that I actually kind of got mad about with a professor of mine, not Corrie. my professor, who's also environmental studies teacher here, we were talking just about climate change and how it's getting really bad, and like thinking about future generations and how they will be very negatively impacted. And I was just expressing, along with my classmates, the frustrations that we have within our generation about that. And a comment that I've heard not only from her, but from several other people who happen to be older than myself, and those on the panel were saying that our generation, so this generation will be there to fix it, kind of. And the reason that upset me was because we're living in it now. And so like when it comes to telling friends and families about why we need to start taking action, I often think about like, how can we expect to sustain a future when we're currently struggling to sustain our own present? Like, we can't think about a future when we barely have our present under control. And another question is like, how can we promise a future of equity and equality when we're failing our current generations? And it's just like all these questions just, can't think of the words. Crap. I know, it just like really weighs on me, because I feel like we've known about this for so long, and we can't keep making the excuse, oh, our future generations will fix it, because our future generations might not be able to fix it if we can't fix it ourselves. So I just think that's really important for everyone to, I guess, think about. I will say I do believe if we are able to set up a strong foundation for our future generations, then they will be able to take it farther than we can. So, hold on, let me do it this way. Okay, there you go.
So, since we're looking at, any of the questions, I was going to talk about something that's like both an argument for your friends and family, and also one of the more effective ways, and like how we can do something about climate justice and work within it. So especially for me, I like to point out and explain how climate justice and climate change as a whole impacts all like fields of study, all disciplines, and this is because it impacts all people. And so there's really no one who can't do anything about it, and you can use your expertise, whatever that may be. If you study like economics, if you're a farmer, a teacher, there's multiple ways to bring this to light. And I saw this last year. My chemistry professor put on a panel, and there were the disciplines from physics and math to environmental science and theology, and they went down like the spectrum and talked about how it impacted their field specifically, and like political science or economics, how that plays a role in climate change. And so for me, I know that I will personally be able to use my education no matter which way I decide to go, if I want to look at policy or if I want to go into medicine, and we see like increased medical issues, even like with Echo talking about personally with the impacts of climate change. It's already happening. And then also just with what everyone can do is working within your community and having these discussions. I have friends that I still try to talk to and explain the importance, friends who are on different pages than me about climate change or haven't heard of climate justice and want to hear more. So we can all be having these discussions, and also just working within the political system. Everyone can vote, and we're able to do that in this country. And so I think sometimes we talk about voting, but we don't always we don't think that our vote may count, but in the end it does, and your representatives should be representing you and the specific policies that you think would be beneficial to your community locally and also nationally. But I think it's really at that local level that we can see change sometimes, and that's a good place to start as well. So there's different ways to do something about climate justice, and what I've learned from coming to college especially is that everyone can really get involved. I've always cared about the environment and cared about nature and had a great relationship with it growing up, like fishing and hunting with my dad. But it's really that I understand that we like all need to be doing something, and you can't, like you were talking about, you can't just keep passing on the burden to someone else. And even if we're in school, we can still educate ourselves, educate others, and everyone can use like their skill set to make a difference, because it's such a multidisciplinary problem that it's going to need a multidisciplinary solution.
So I really like what you said. A lot. Because it's pretty much kind of what I was saying in terms of what effective and hopeful ways we can achieve climate justice. And I would definitely also emphasize like my education for sure, because because when I came into environmental studies, well, just in college in general, I had the idea of like, yes, I'm just going to work with animals. It's going to be great. We're going to have great times. But then I ran into a problem, and I realized that as much as I would love to work with animals, I need to be able to learn about the environment not only they live in, but that I live in order to take care of them. And so just coming to college and being an environmental studies major and consistently learning about everything that our world is going through, whether it, like from all disciplines, I really think the best way we can achieve it, or at least start achieving it, is through transparency with radical curiosity. And what I mean by this is something that we have discussed in Corrie's class I'm currently in. It's called Gender and the Environment. And we've talked about this idea of feminist curiosity. And within that, it embodies just like asking those hard questions, and excuse my language, but actually like giving a shit about people. And I mean, I'm just saying, but just like truly caring for another, for your neighbor, whether they're a human species or not. And so I feel like just having these conversations, but everywhere, and taking our lives seriously and others' lives seriously, we can actually I guess pave the way not only for our time but for future times to like try our best to, I guess, counteract what's going on.
So if anyone wants to make like a 30-second to 1 minute final comment, you're welcome to, so we can kind of stay a little bit on time. So I'll open it up for that.
So I'd like to look at the last question on what do you see as the most effective and hopeful ways to achieve climate justice? And going off of what Morgan said was conversation. Is just talk to people, talk about how climate change is affecting their life, from farmers and how their crops are changing to health-related reasons and respiratory problems. And don't just like talk, but also listen. Like listen to what they're saying, be open-minded, letting them know that you're there for them. And when you do listen, don't be complacent with what they tell you. One of the most frustrating things I hear is like, yes, climate change is inevitable. The world's going to end. It's not. It'll be okay. As long as we're not complacent, we keep working hard and striving for what we know we can do. Because I know that when a community works together, change does happen. And we need the world as one community to change. And that's hopeful.
I love what Mallory said, and I totally agree, because I think, what I wrote specifically for this is a very overwhelming topic, and it can seem really desolate. And I think what we all hear all the time is, I'm just one person. What are my actions going to do if I say one thing, or doing sustainable practices like bringing reusable bags to the grocery store or turning off the lights. It's like, what is the actual point to this? Because I am one person, I'm a drop in the ocean. And so I think what we all really emphasize is, I don't think any of us would be here if we didn't have hope, if we weren't so excited about what the future holds and what is coming. But the only way that we can really emphasize that hope and underline it is by having conversation, and by talking about it, and by not going on the mentality of saying ignorance is bliss and pretending like all of this is not happening, because that in itself is not productive, and it's not going to benefit ourselves or our future communities. And so exactly going along with what Mallory's saying is being open-minded to having conversation like this, and also knowing that you have an influence. So maybe if you bring if you bring reusable bags to the grocery store one day, that's going to make a chain reaction, because the person behind you is going to notice your action, and it's seen. These actions don't go unheard, and being able to facilitate and be an inspiration for your community and for people in general, that in itself is hopeful, and that is going to bring a climate just society.
Yeah, same.
I was just gonna say, I really liked what Mallory brought up earlier with Pope Francis. Those quotes are awesome. And I was just going to say that this is, with climate justice, it really is a social justice issue, and as Catholics especially, we should really try to be leaders in like these social justice issues. And we as this theme of these talks talk about care for creation, and we focus on caring for everyone and recognizing that everyone is a child of God. And so I think that like a central issue of climate justice is seeing each person, whether they're in your community or across the world, as a child of God, and really acting on how we see Jesus in everyone, and understanding that we need to recognize who's being most impacted negatively, and that everyone has, there's consequences to climate change, and everyone's impacted in different ways, and really seeing that we need to care for everyone from this mindset.
I still want to say 3 words. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Thank you. So we will open it up for any questions you might have for the panelists.
Can you just go down the line and just say like 3 or 4 things that you do on a daily basis to think about saving the world? Just to bring it down local here.
Grocery shopping. I'm a senior, and I really need to have leave, like to do grocery shopping. And then I really co-op is like one of the main resources. Like I really thinking about people all talk about how expensive co-op is. Yes, like for those packaged stuff, it might be relatively comparably expensive. But like if you buy vegetable there, it's like if you get like organic vegetable in there, it's actually cheaper, according to Corrie. So and then just really thinking about like when I'm buying stuff, I'm really thinking about where are those stuff come from? Am I is it my activities are impacting other people's life? I was buying a car recently, and I was really thinking about I really shouldn't buy a car that take a lot of gas. So I probably shouldn't buy a pickup. So I buy a Subaru, and then that's like really saving a lot of like gas, and it's just so good for the environment. And then buy clothes, like where should you buy like clothes from Forever 21 or maybe from Patagonia, who are much more sustainable. Like it's just like daily consuming. That's just like what I'm like trying to think about every day. Like I'm starting using the straw, the reusable straw, like, or like every time I go to the coffee shop, I feel really guilty to using those like a paper cup. I just feel super bad. And then I was like, every time I'm using it, I'm just like probably killing someone, killing the animal, killing the tree, and the tree have the right to like living to grow as well. So it just like think of like your daily life are actually making impact, and it's definitely helpful. And like with all those young women and all of you are here, it's just like we can do something slowly and talk it out, shout out to people. I always like when people were using the reusable straw, I was like, wow, you're using the straw. And then people like get so motivated and keeping using it, and then like, or people using the mug, I was like, oh my god, so cool, you're using the cup, you're not actually using the paper bag. Not paper bag, paper cup. But still, like, just like shout out to people. I think it's just really motivational.
I would just say, like, on an everyday basis, I try to not waste food, I think, is, like, something that I've just become more, like, knowledgeable about, and really making an effort to get, like, the amount of food that I'm going to eat, and, like, just be more conscious about that. And then also just having those discussions. I have friends who may not talk about climate change regularly, and so me just bringing up like, oh, I'm going to this class or on this panel, and so we can just talk about why that's important, and bring it more, like make it a more natural conversation and a more everyday part of life.
Thank you for the question, because I know that, it's little things, I think, that are going to make a difference. But I would say, number one, and I know Cormac, who was here last week, talked about this, but reducing our meat consumption is, and it by no means does it need to be black or white, where you say, I'm never going to even look at meat again, I can't deal with it or smell it or be around it. That's unattainable. And so just being aware, and so saying like, okay, every Monday I'm not gonna have meat with my breakfast, or something like that, where it's very small, and I think it can be a lot more attainable in that way. And then I also agree with consumerism, where we are with what everything that we are consuming, so whether that be food or clothing or even gifts for different family members or things like that. There's a lot of really sustainable companies out there that specifically use either reused materials, or the people who are doing the labor are treated a lot more ethically, and it could be supporting a larger cause. Like I know next week at St. Ben St. John's we have a Sex Trafficking Awareness Week, and there's a lot of companies that support causes like that and specifically donate a lot of their funds to companies, and so to organizations that are supporting people in sex trafficking. And so that is the exact same with climate refugees, or with people who are out of a home because of the large climate effects. And those both of those are simple and really easy to implement into daily life. It's just being aware.
So I'm going to piggyback on consumerism again, because I love shopping. But whenever I try to shop, I always think about the life cycle of whatever I buy. So it's not just like the thing you buy and then you have it, but it's also like what do you do with it afterwards. So in my apartment, we all compost everything. So it really takes down on our trash. So also with clothes, like what do you do after you're done? Do you throw it away, or do you give it to Goodwill, or do you reuse it as a rag? So just thinking about the entire life cycle, because nature naturally decomposes everything and it brings new life. So I think we really need to start doing that in society with all of our goods, is thinking about the entire life cycle, not just like that small chunk of its life of when you use it. and also thinking of where you're getting it from. So I'm a firm believer in like shop locally, so like the co-op, because when you do buy food at Target, you also have to take into account the price of its carbon emissions. Like that asparagus came from like Peru, which is thousands of miles away, or did you go to the co-op and buy asparagus which was like 20 miles away? Like you got to think of where it came from and the full environmental price it has.
Can you repeat the question? Just because I want to make sure I understand it fully.
Give a couple ideas of what you kind of think about on a daily basis.
In terms of like climate stuff. Okay. I'm trying to think. So if I'm being honest, I didn't really start taking what I do seriously until this past year. So I'm a junior and I've been in environmental studies ever since freshman year, but the goal this entire time has been able to use that to influence the potential work I want to do one day with animals. And I don't think it really hit me that I wanted to use myself as an advocate for climate justice until that one panel that I talked to at
This semester, yeah.
There was a panel that happened last semester that really just moved me, and then I went up to Corrie and I was just like, I don't know, but like all of a sudden I just feel it. But going into more of my personal like actions, for a while now I have been, when it comes to like consuming, I really I have curly hair, gotta take care of that. That's hard. Also gotta use a lot of hair product too. So I was thinking about that one day, and I actually ended up doing a lot of research on the chemical sides of my hair products, but not just hair products, but the things I use on my body to daily basis. And I realized how many of those not only are bad for me, bad for the environment, but are animal tested. So to kind of combat all of that, I actively seek out to get vegan items. So like all my hair products are like vegan. I don't do my makeup as often as I used to, but now that when I do, I make sure I use vegan makeup products. I also used to be a vegetarian at one time. I know I know a few of our panelists are still. I am not. But so I know it's just like little things like that for me right now that I know that are really keeping me going. Also, in my apartment with my roommates, we have enforced the if it's yellow, let it mellow, and if it's brown, flush it down. So, and I really like that. It's a nice surprise. I don't think I've ever been so happy to see pee in a toilet for a while. So, so those are the little things for me. But I just want to continue to like broaden my horizons so I can actively do more things. So.
I can add a couple that weren't mentioned. So I live on Highway 51 by Thompson's Greenhouse, which I'm sure maybe many of you know, and so I ride my bike to work. I work at St. John's, and I recently installed solar panels on my house. So those are a couple of things. I think in addition, the most important thing I do is teach and try to share these ideas with young people and try to give them the tools to connect to communities that are actually working on making change. So a lot of us are, 2 carfuls of people are going to Minneapolis on Saturday for a training about how to support Native communities in resistance to the Keystone Pipeline, which would carry tar sands, which is one of the most carbon-intensive forms of oil on the planet, very damaging to the climate and damaging to the sovereignty of indigenous nations. So things like that, I think, are some of the most important things that I kind of do on a daily basis. Other questions?
Hi. Are there countries in the world that you consider as models or leadership in terms of climate change, whether it be in renewable energy usage or consumables? And how do they get there? What policies and do they follow?
I'm gonna talk quick because I have to go after this. So I'd say a main model I would look at is Scandinavia. Like they do a great job with like renewable energy. Also a lot of their policies are focused on the people and not capitalism. So like they're focused on the welfare of their people. They give the parents longer leaves after they have a child. And not just that, they like have stronger environmental laws that protect the land, where when I look at America, a lot of the laws protect large corporations. So they get away with a lot of environmental degrading practices. And I'm also 75% Finnish, so I have like a strong sense of pride in Scandinavia and all that they do. Okay.
I know that especially in some of our courses, we've talked a lot about Copenhagen, and they do a lot there. They have a lot more kind of what Mallory was saying with Scandinavia, that there is a focus on the people, and it is more of a socialist society where you're supporting the welfare, and there's healthcare is a lot more prevalent, and having access to these natural resources like we were explaining before. And there's the green energy movement. I think a lot of we can learn a lot from what they are doing there. They have there's this one building I know that is completely green, and so it's an energy loop where there's we aren't taking in any extra energy to be able to support the building, and there's like a ski hill that goes down at the top of it, and I think it's something that is an icon in their society. And so if you're looking for different areas to research, those are definitely two strong ones.
I also learned about the work that Costa Rica has been doing, and the speaker, I heard a speaker talk about Costa Rica when I was at the UN Climate Conference in Poland last fall, and she has a TED Talk that I could probably get you the link to somehow, but she linked Costa Rica's sustainability environmentally to the fact that they haven't had an army since the 1970s, or maybe it's been longer than that. So they abolished their army, and then they are completely carbon zero in their electricity already. And now they're trying to electrify their transportation and use renewable energy for transportation. They're also trying to decarbonize their financial system by divesting from fossil fuels and from shutting down all of the oil refineries that they have there. They export the oil that they refine. So they're quite an impressive case. They're a small country, and they recognize that, but they're trying to be a leader. New Zealand also, which is about the same size as Costa Rica population-wise, they recently are not issuing any more offshore or onshore, I believe, oil leases. So, and then there are a number of countries in the EU who are banning diesel and gas-powered vehicle sales as early as 2030. So there's a lot of momentum happening in different places. Other questions?
Before any of you, more of you need to leave, and I don't want to squelch the questioning, but I want to compliment you all for coming. I'm a little disappointed there aren't any young men in the group, but they're probably off driving their diesel pickups. Thank you. It seems like it comes down to choices that we each make as individuals. We can make choices that are just good for us, or what we know is good for humanity. And it seems like it's choices that we might have been told about as we were growing up, that our parents tell us that's the choices you make. And it is for us as adults too, it seems. Mm-hmm. How can we transfer that, besides discussions like this, I think, which really help people understand that it's up to each and every one of us. But how do you get people to make good choices for humanity rather than just for yourself? I don't know if that's an appropriate question, but.
Very appropriate, I think, a challenging one.
Example. So how can we make humanity care about others besides themselves? Kind of. Okay.
What makes her a scooter rather than a pickup? Why? She could just say, what the heck, I want a pickup.
Yes. I guess, okay, I will answer this more from a personal aspect, and the fact of like when I stopped caring about myself and started caring about others. I didn't grow up with a great life. It was great in my eyes, but if it was from an outside perspective, it wasn't.
And I learned I had to grow up at a very young age than more kids have to. And it was within that stage of my life when I realized it's less about me and more about the people. So that includes me, but it can't just be me. And I guess just like I resonate a lot with several people's struggles who come from a background more similar to mine. And I think it's just those struggles that really open up a person's mind and realize that they're not the only one who's going through it. There's other people who are going through it, who went through the exact same thing you went through. And they're still strong and they're still standing, so why can't I, type of thing. So I know it was like within my life that I realized it's more about the people, and then when I started studying the environment, it just reflected it's about the people, because when one person's down, the next person down, and it'll keep going. It's just a domino effect. So I guess, is it the butterfly effect? What is that? Yeah. Okay, the butterfly effect. I didn't know, but yeah. So it's pretty much like the butterfly effect, and I see this also in like my studies with biology. When you're looking at like a species on a biological level, one species is affected by another. So I don't know, maybe there was like an overpopulation of one species, for example, that affects not only its predators, it affects its prey, whether that's another species or a plant life form. So I guess just from my studies and my experiences, that's what really opened my perspective, I would say.
And then going along with everything that Morgan is saying, I think this is, I have a very similar mindset, and we've talked about this with Corrie, and then also with even friends in similar fields that Morgan was explaining that the way that she's able to connect and make it broader than herself is by seeing these shared experiences. And no matter what, obviously we live in a very partisan society and world right now where it's very polarized, and when people explain their ideas, it's very simple these ideas get shot down very easily because of the label that is on them, or because of the extremity of whatever your value or ethos is. But no matter what, you cannot shoot down somebody's personal experience, because that it happened, and you can't unvalidate that. And you are also able to connect over that because you have personal shared experiences. So Morgan's able to connect with people because of the background that she has. Then she's able to reach out to people who have had a similar experience. And so, for example, for people in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, obviously water is very important to this culture. And Valerie was saying that she grew up fishing with her dad, and that's always been very important to her. And so the way that an example of us being able to connect with that is there are a lot of Native and Indigenous communities who live in Minnesota. So whether that be in the Ojibwe tribe, who find so much strength in fishing in their culture, then we are able, even though we did not clearly grow up in the same experience, we can then connect with them over that love and importance of fishing, because it's integral to our cultures and our personal lives in similar ways. And so we're going to be able, the only way that we can make this bigger than ourselves is realizing that we have these personal shared experiences that we can all connect over.
Okay.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
Do you know of anything that you guys are doing legislatively?
There is something in Congress called the Green New Deal that has been introduced to Congress. It's right now it's not a bill per se, it's more of an idea. And a number of people who are running for president in the next election have, just come out and saying they're going to support it or not. And so I think it'll be a big part of the next election, regardless. And I think it's a really valuable idea because it's all centered on mobilizing the kind of resources that we mobilized to get out of the Great Depression when we had the New Deal, to mobilize around the world wars, where we completely transformed our economy for the war effort. So we can do big scale transformative shifts in our economic system, putting people to work for the good of the country. And that's kind of the kernel of hope in the Green New Deal, is that we should do that in terms of a transformation of our society, our politics, and our economy to be focused on regeneration, to be focused on renewable energy, and that we could not only create renewable energy and help address climate change, we can also enhance social justice. So all the people that have lost their jobs in the outsourcing of manufacturing, we can put those people to work building solar panels and wind turbines and repairing the infrastructure of the country, which is in need of repair, and we can repair it better, make it a smart microgrid where our electricity is just going where we need it. So that's the Green New Deal is really about transforming our infrastructure and doing it with a social justice lens, making sure the people who have been most harmed by current systems and that are most harmed by environmental impacts are the first to be working in this kind of solution. And so that's, I think, a really hopeful thing that has emerged on the federal level. And Minnesota they have legislation going for 100% carbon-free electricity in Minnesota by 2050. Xcel Energy also has this same commitment. So we're seeing a rapid, change in our electricity generation, which is quite good here locally. So a lot of positive things happening.
11 years.
11 years is a short time. I think we better call it to a close. I will ask you to join me in thanking them in just a minute, but first a plug for the rummage sale, which is one way to reduce, reuse, recycle, which the social justice puts that on, and it'll be the last Thursday and Friday of April. We don't have a Sunday drop-off this year because it's Easter Sunday, so drop-off of donations will be Monday and Tuesday. Please bring your stuff and then come back and get some stuff and reduce, reuse, recycle. Let's see, what else was I going to say? The co-op, she was mentioned, put in a plug for the co-op. And I will encourage you to read in the bulletin the little notes that we've been putting in there for the Creation Care program, and invite you to come to the April 27th closure of that program that the Social Justice Committee has been working on, and utilize the ideas that have been put into the bulletin for creation care of one sort or another. Am I forgetting anything, other members of the committee?
We were going to plug Pat, but we kind of did that earlier.
Yeah, we thanked Pat. It's been wonderful providing the soup for us for all these many years, actually, of doing this. So please join me in thanking our panel. We've been very lucky to have them. Thank you.